You're not going to convince me that life without a corporate job is worse. No more early morning alarms, asking permission to take a vacation, pointless meetings, or urgent projects that, in the grand scheme of life, really aren't that important. Leaving corporate life has its perks, but that doesn't mean the grass is always greener on the other side. And today's guest, Maggie Tucker, would probably agree with me. She expected money and identity to be the biggest challenges in early retirement. But what she didn't expect was that freedom she worked so hard for would also create another problem entirely. Without a boss, deadlines, or someone telling you what to do next, you have to create your own structure, purpose, and direction. So today, Maggie's going to share what she's learned from 4 years into early retirement, including how she created a framework for her days, why she believes fun and adventure matter, and what people approaching FIRE should start really practicing before they reach the finish line. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Maggie Tucker. Do you feel like life is generally better, happier than it was kind of when you were working a corporate job?
For sure. I will say, though, I liked my job. I liked what I did. I liked the company I worked for. I liked the people I worked with. I didn't love the volume and the lack of balance and many things that came with it, and that I had trouble creating boundaries and saying no. But I did like my job. It's like two things can be true. I liked my job. I also really like not having that job. I'm 4 years in now, and I feel like I finally hit my groove. Took me a little, I heard some people say it takes like 12 to 18 months. And I was like, okay, well, it's taken me like twice as long as that. But I'm feeling good. I'm a little bit of a slow learner, I guess. But I've not looked back. I've not once regretted my decision.
Likewise, I did like my job as well. Just wanted to do other things with my time, to be honest, and take the money out of the equation. That job wasn't high on my priority list at that point in time. But I'm curious, you and your husband both retired on the same day. That was May 6, 2022. Tell me about that day. How did you feel? Like, what was the feeling leaving the office, seeing your husband when you got home, the feeling the next day? Kind of curious what some of the general feelings were that day, if you remember.
We were still, so keep in mind, this is 2022. It was right before summer. It was still kind of post-COVID. I mean, I don't know how long we used the word post-COVID, but it was still in the return to work. We were still, I think at the time, people were being asked to go in 2 days a week. Maybe it was even 1 day a week. I don't remember. I had pushed down to 80% for the last year of my role. And I happened to work for, I shouldn't like advertise this, but for a boss who was like, I don't care how many days you go in a week, as long as you're getting your job done. And so I was barely going in 1 day a week at that point, because they also knew I was leaving. I'd given a lot of notice. I gave like 9 months notice. And I was doing my job. I was doing what I needed to do, but I wasn't really in the office. So it was a little bit of a weird feeling because... So
you shut the laptop and like, you're done.
Yeah,
you walked out the door, quote,
I had to actually bring my laptop back like a month later because I was still trying... I'll admit, we retired on the same day and Greg had a clean break. I was still technically burning vacation after that they let me use after my last day. So I had not finished like transitioning some files and other things. And so I turned my laptop in like a couple weeks later, but I wasn't like doing anything and nobody knew. I was kind of like secretly in the background doing some final transition work. So it wasn't like a immediate, this is all done for me. I will say it did not feel real for a long time. We went on this big 6-week trip with our kids to Europe right afterwards. I mean, it felt like a very unique thing because we'd never done such a long trip with the kids, but it kind of just felt like we were on summer vacation, and it didn't really start to feel real until summer was over and the kids were back at school. So it wasn't this like immediate feeling. It was sort of this doesn't seem real. I'm on vacation. I'm sure I'll have to go back to work soon. I was dreaming about work a lot. I kept thinking I would wake up and be like, do I have to like go to work? And then I would sort of realize like, oh, I can go back to bed if I want.
That's partial PTSD, I feel like.
Yeah, it's a little bit of like, reverse PTS, exactly.
We're so parallel. My last day of work was May 6th. They asked if I wanted to use my PTO and kind of extend. I ended up just cashing out the PTO and being done with work, but I did consider working for a couple more weeks and using my PTO to bridge a little bit just to get one more month of insurance
that was
June.
One of the reasons I did it.
And just like you, I feel like I haven't quite settled into early retirement. June and early July have been like heavy travel months for me. So I haven't quite found the rhythm of the early retirement lifestyle yet.
You're way too fresh. That's why. It's brand new. Again, I say it took me at least 2 years to find the rhythm. And then I would sort of lose the rhythm and gain. I would have these like ups and downs, peaks and valleys. And I feel like I'm finally 4 years in at a sort of steady pace where I feel like I know how to do this and I know the right level of structure and all these other things. And so, yeah, when I look at you, it's like me looking at someone where I'm like, oh, you're just a little, I mean this with all due respect, by the way, I'm just half joking, but like, you're just a little early retirement baby. You know, you just came out of the early retirement womb, and like, it's gonna, it feels so, it just doesn't feel real for a while. Again, it feels like you have to go back to work in a month or something, like you're on a long vacation.
I'd love to get some advice from you and some hindsight with 2020 on your side too. Should I just enjoy this middle period? It feels a little unsettling, and we're going to get into this idea here in a minute too. It feels a little unsettling that I like don't have the structure yet, but I'm also wondering if I should just embrace a little bit of it right now.
I 100% think you should embrace a little bit of it right now. I don't think you should try to, this isn't like you now have the freedom and flexibility to do this on your own terms, for once in your life, or for maybe the first time in your life. I think for me, really felt like the first time in my life, right? That I wasn't a teenager, a job in college, just all these things where I was on somebody else's timeline and schedule, and, them setting goals and expectations for me. For the first time, I was on my own. And so is this the first time you're really on your own?
I took a mini retirement in 2020, but within a month, COVID started too. So that also felt a little
weird. Yeah.
Like all my plans blew up for that too. And I was just like readjusting on the fly with that. But yeah, I took a 7-month mini retirement. But outside of that, I've been working in school since 15. So last 17 years for me.
Yeah. So, my advice to you and to anyone else in that situation would be, if you can, and if it works for your personality and your lifestyle, just roll with it, right? Just be in your feelings. Don't overthink things. So the first full summer that we had off, not the one that we went on this big trip with our kids, but like the next one where we were sort of, in our groove a little bit. And we had, almost a year of 9 to 12 months of this under our belts. I kept joking that it was like my hot fire summer, because I was like, I'm just lazy. I'm sleeping as late as the kids are. I mean, we had semi-teenagers at that point, and they sleep in. Nobody was really on a schedule. We were all just kind of living our best lives. The way I kind of was joking, I regressed heavily, and I would always joke. Like, I was like, I'm living like a teenager this summer. I mean, I guess my advice would be journal, which I'm terrible at, but like just recognize and notice your feelings and feel the feelings, but also just do what you want to do, right? So I watched way too much TV during that period of time, right after, the kids went back to school and stuff. And I was a little more, I don't even want to use the word lazy, but I was resting more than I had ever rested before. And so it felt very uncomfortable to me. But I was just kind of leaning into what felt right. And I was trying a lot of different things. And I think that's okay. I would not encourage anyone to overly focus on trying to put structure in place on day one. I think you want to just kind of like get into it and feel your way through it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. But then at some point in time, structure does come up, and it felt like it stemmed from this concept that you call ennui. Would love if you could explain what that is, kind of break that down for us a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I didn't come up with the word ennui, by the way. That is a French word, I believe. And it means a feeling of listlessness or dissatisfaction from a lack of occupation. That's the exact definition. When I heard that word, I was like, I couldn't quite put a feeling on how I was feeling, but that is how I was feeling. I really enjoyed the idea of having all this freedom, and I really liked so many aspects of it, but something also didn't feel right. Like, I think you said this in the very beginning. There were a couple of big things I was super afraid of when I was leaving. And when I finally convinced myself, and my husband and I convinced ourselves to take the plunge into early retirement, I was personally kind of scared of two things. I was scared that I was going to lose my identity, and that like so much of my identity was tied up in my job and my title and what I did for a living, that I would be lost without that, if you will, which not at all. I didn't have that feeling like once. The second one was that like I would run out of money or something. And both of those things have not happened, or not, on track to happen, I should say. And the thing that I didn't predict was I instead had this feeling that I just couldn't put my finger on, which again, I finally did put my finger on it, and it was called ennui, and that was the perfect definition of it. When I was working, I had a vision for how I was going to spend my time in early retirement. And then when I actually had the time, I literally had a list. I'd been keeping a list. I called it my fire bucket list. When I got into retirement, I was like, well, let's start working that list. And to be clear, it wasn't just like to-dos around the house, right? It was like fun projects. It was hobbies. It was things I wanted to explore. But I had no energy or motivation or will to do any of those things. And so I was like, what's going on? I finally have all the time in the world, as one would say, and which I really didn't, because I had committed to a lot of things. But I had more time than I'd ever had in a long time. But I didn't have the desire to do things. And when I finally at least could put a name on that feeling, I started to be able to better kind of work through what was happening and also just give myself some grace and some patience. That I was also getting into a lot of old habits that made me really good at work at corporate America, but did not make me good at early retirement. What made me really good and successful in corporate America at a high level is I was a hard worker. I was good at things. I picked up on things quickly, but I was a hard worker. I was a people pleaser. I raised my hand for everything. And I went above and beyond. And that serves you really well in that sort of environment. I had the right attitude and I was delivering. And you don't get that from everybody. I managed a lot of people over the years. And I not just was delivering, I was going above and beyond, right? I was working more than the average person. I was putting, too much of myself into work, arguably. But when I went into early retirement as a people pleaser, I'm getting into a lot of volunteer roles. I'm doing stuff for other people. I'm helping friends with their projects, which I do like helping friends. I like doing things. But I was doing that stuff before I was doing stuff that I needed to do for myself and that was important to me. And I was putting everybody else's stuff kind of in front of my own stuff. It was almost like easier in a way. I'm like, well, my stuff is at my own pace, right? And I say my stuff is in like podcast stuff I wanted to do, just ideas I had for the podcast, passion projects, hobbies I wanted to get into. I mean, I have a guitar that's been sitting over in the corner. Still, I've taken like a couple online lessons. I know a good in-person instructor, texted with him, need to just schedule just things that I want to do. Like that's one of 10 examples of just things I want to try out. And I did try out certain things, right? Like I tried out vegetable gardening and realized I don't like it and it's not what I want to do. But my point is I was putting everybody else's stuff first. And I think that's something that made me really good in a corporate environment and made me not so great in an early retirement environment.
So how did you end up coming to terms with listlessness? When did it happen? And it didn't feel like you entirely wanted to shove that feeling out, but I do feel like in your words right now, you were wrestling with it at some point in time.
Yeah, I think I was wrestling with it on and off for, years, honestly. Probably the most in year 2 and 3, or I'd probably say year 2 if I had to kind of break it down. Because my first year, I was really just like sitting in it and just kind of dealing with things as they came. And I wasn't thinking very like strategically about things. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but I spent my whole life thinking strategically about things. And then I got into this next phase of life and I just kind of let it happen as it unfolded. I didn't think strategically about anything. And as I was recognizing and honestly, being able to name the feeling ennui was like half the battle for me.
Yeah.
I started realizing I needed more structure in my days. And I think the structure was a huge piece. I always really liked the term freedom within a framework because I love freedom. One of the things I've come to really love about early retirement is just totally open days. Because I'm the person who wakes up and is all of a sudden like, I'm going to repaint my deck today. My husband hates this. He's happy to help with all this stuff. He just wants like at least 24 hours notice because he's not the person that wakes up and then wants to get like, and he doesn't even, I'll be like, no, I'm going to do it. And he's like, yeah, but then I feel like a jerk sitting here watching you like, cut down trees in the front yard. I'm just very like on a whim. I get a crazy idea and I want to go do it now. So I love the idea of freedom. But I was realizing I really need a better framework. I need some structure. I need even just about when I work out and what I'm doing. And I was just kind of floundering without some level of structure. And so I started creating a bit more of a framework and it's evolved. It changes from time to time, but I have a little bit more of a focus on, the types of things I want to incorporate into my day. And this is the freedom within a framework part. I don't always stick with this because things will come up. I will have a day where I say, on Tuesdays is when I edit podcast and do podcast show notes and stuff like that. And I kind of block that day for that. or I've got certain volunteer roles I do, and I will try to say, I'm going to try to do most of that work on this day. But I play pickleball with a group of people, and we just sort of are always texting about who's free at what times, and a bunch of people have jobs, and so they're like trying to schedule it in between meetings and stuff. And so sometimes it's nice. All of a sudden I'm just like, cool, yeah, I can drop what I'm doing because it's flexible, and yes, I can play pickleball at noon. And so I like the idea of having a rough structure and framework, but also knowing that I'm in charge of it all and I can move stuff at any moment. As a matter of fact, you remember last week we were supposed to record this episode.
Yes.
And I had a hankering it was like the last day that I was in town and the World Cup's in my backyard, in my city. And I was like, it was like the only one of two home games that I was even in town for this summer. I was like, we should try to get tickets to the World Cup game. And my brother was down for it. And so my husband, my brother and his wife and I went, and it was so much fun. And you were so kind. I was like, really sorry, but I think we're going to get World Cup tickets, and it's right in the middle of this recording. And so we rescheduled, and that was great, right? And that's the kind of stuff where if I had a job, it's hard to move stuff like that sometimes. Yes. And I have found the most success with this kind of freedom within a framework, which is I try to create some structure and framework, and I have things time blocked on my calendar, but it's also very flexible when and if I need to move them. And I'm doing a better job of scheduling certain things. So I was noticing that Greg is my husband, Greg and I were not fully taking advantage of all of our freedom because we would both end up kind of scheduling things. And then we realized we didn't really have one day that we were both free at the same time. He'd be like, oh, well, I agree to take the kids here or do this or whatever. And I'm like, oh, I'm taking my mom to a doctor's appointment that day. And so we started blocking off days. We'd kind of look at our calendars and we'd block off adventure days. And we were just realizing we weren't taking advantage of the fact that we were tired. We were kind of like revolving around our kids' schedule and other stuff. And if we just did a tiny bit of pre-planning, like literally just the week before, we could both say, okay, let's block off Tuesday and not schedule. I won't schedule a podcast recording and, he won't schedule anything. And we would go do adventure days around Atlanta. We would just in the middle, after the kids go to school, we'd go down to the Beltline and walk like 7 or 8 miles and eat along the way. We'd go visit places. There's some like really beautiful like Buddhist temples and other things in 45 minutes outside Atlanta. And we'd go take a field trip. We took my mom on one of them sometimes. We would just go visit different places in our city that we hadn't been to or just didn't spend enough time at. And that was really fun because we were then starting to feel the fun part of being retired. We have 3 kids, so we can't just like get up and go in the middle of the school year, but we can locally get up and go. And so we started scheduling more of that as an example too.
Yeah, Adventure Days was like my favorite idea when I was researching. I was like, underline, underline, underline. Yes. Like, I think inherently we all like understand this. I'd be curious to know like when you named it, like if you immediately named it Adventure Days or if you were just like, did a couple of these and you're like, you know what? Like we should try to schedule an adventure day every day. And Greg just like rolled with it. And he's like, yeah, Adventure Days. Like it's very catchy.
Greg's awesome. He rolls with everything. I don't even know if I got that name from someone else or if I made that name up. That's how my memory works. So who knows? But I just know on my calendar, I was calling them Adventure Days. We should come up with an adventure. Oh, and in the beginning, we've gotten a little bit off this because I'll tell you what we did last year, which was fun, but we got a little off it. But in the beginning, we were both, it was every other person, you have to schedule every other week. So then you also, it's kind of like when you have to like schedule a date night for your partner, right? It's just a date basically. But it made it fun because you had to sort of, there's a little bit of a challenge to like do something new and different. We got to get back on that in 2026 because last year at the beginning of the year, like I just come up with these random things. And again, Greg's just like goes along with it because he's awesome. It was like mid-January and we were at a state park with our kids hiking. I don't know what we were doing. But anyways, I was like, they have those little like kind of park books at the Georgia State Parks and you can like stamp off the ones you do. And I was like, hey, we should try to hike all 48 Georgia State Parks in 2025, which Greg didn't necessarily think we could do at first. And I was like, well, and he was like, but no big deal. Let's try it. He's like, but let's just not like kill ourselves if we can't get to it. And I was like, okay, but we're going to get to it. So one of the things that is, limiting us, which I briefly mentioned, is we can only go so far, right? Because our kids are at school. But we did have a chunk of time between, like 8 and 2:30 because of the different schools they're at. It's actually not as big of a chunk of time as one would think. But we had this chunk of time. And so we were like, there is a lot we can do. And we could drive 2 hours, hike for an hour, drive 2 hours home. It was a lot of driving, I will say at times. But there were sometimes days where we would do like an overnight trip. and do 2 of them. We did a whole like week long during fall break and took our kids with us and did a bunch of them with the kids. But we did all of them together. The kids were there for a handful of them, and we were able to do all of them. And we explored, we got a lot of cool hikes, a handful of parks that we had already been to. But we also went to tons of ones that I otherwise never would have gone to, some that were super cool. And then also we explored these like tiny towns in Georgia that I never would have otherwise been to. I now feel like I've seen all the different pieces of Georgia, good and bad. And it was really cool. Like we went to a town and we learned that like that's where they filmed Fried Green Tomatoes. There's just like some kind of like interesting things we learned about stuff. And we visited some where we were like, oh my gosh, I could retire to this like mountain town, and just some very cute places. So it was fun.
Yeah, I like adventure days, and then I love structuring around like this bigger goal of like all the state parks, and it brings a lot of novelty because you're gonna naturally like have to drive places you've never been. You might stop and get lunch somewhere because you're 3 hours away from home or something. The idea was a really solid idea. Do you have anything else cooking in terms of like other bigger adventure day series? I don't know if series is the right word, but like an ongoing one.
I do need to come up with some, but it's tough because like during summer I just sort of get into like, it's just a whole different like season of our lives around us and the kids and the amount we're traveling and other things. But I will say what I love about it, and then I am going to answer your question, which is I need to figure it out. I will say like what I love about it, and it kind of reminds me of work, right? At work, it might not even have been a goal you like created and wanted to get behind, but when you had an annual goal and you had a target and you had check-ins on a regular basis, like it did like good or bad, right? It kept you on track and it gave you some level of motivation and check-in. And so when you all of a sudden have like no goals and really nothing you have to do, I did notice that these self-imposed goals, and that, you know, the park was a fun one, but I have some that are around, you know, my workout progress, and I'm using the Peloton app a lot now, and I bought a Peloton and like tracking things. It is really helping me to stay on, again, there are things I want to do, but the 48 Georgia state parks in 1 year was something where it's like we had a bit of an aggressive timeline. It made us be much more purposeful. And Greg even commented at the end of the year, he's like, God, we got in so many cool hikes this year that we wouldn't have otherwise done. And there's a lot of weekends and days when we would have otherwise just been way less active and not out and about doing something. And so it really did give us a little bit of like a push. It made that year really enjoyable. I don't have something like that in 2026, but I feel like I need to you know, take my own lessons and get a little bit more on that. It's like nice to be off that. Right when that was done, we were like, okay, it's nice to just like not think about what we have to do every weekend. But there is like some in between of I want to get back to more of that.
Yeah. I think the frequency would be something I'd want to question a little bit. Like 48 in 1 year would be a lot. Fritz Gilbert, he had a great idea. He was episode 198. Him and his wife, I think they did like 24 blank pieces of paper, and they just wrote ideas on each one of those pieces of paper and then put them all in a jar. And then the concept was they were going to pull one out, and then that would be the thing that they would do that day. And it was a lot of like things they wanted to try around town or around the area. Like it could have been like, oh, take a pottery making class, or it could have been like visiting the small town that was 2 hours away. He, ironically too, he hasn't gotten to that jar yet. Like he just like immediately was like busy in retirement. And he told me that like, if he dumped that jar out, they probably would already have done about half of them. Like they were just like, it was almost like the idea generating exercise helped him like always think through like what he wanted to do with his wife on Thursdays. But yeah, I kind of like the idea of like building a jar and then slowly pulling them out and having a go-to place when you're drawing a blank on what you want to do for that day's adventure day.
Yeah, I love that. And it's funny, the way I am though, if I knew I had done half of those things, I would have to like go and find them in the jar and check them off. And it would make me feel so nice. And I would put them up on a board and be like, look what we did. I love that he can just leave them in the jar. It says something about him.
I told him, it wasn't on the recording, I don't think, but I told him he should start working through that jar a little bit. And he's like, you know what, I need to.
I'm gonna take that. I'm gonna do some version of that idea. I've seen people do that in like summertime with their kids, where they all write a bunch of stuff up on the board, and you don't necessarily have to blindly pick it, because I think I'm gonna be in a different mood different days, though that's an extra level of, I don't know what, to blindly pick it. I think I might need to actually like let myself choose, you know?
Yeah.
But I like the idea of but we have to do something, you know, once a week off this list.
Yeah.
And it could be a mix of like outings. It could be a mix of like, there might be some house projects in there. It could be a little bit of different things.
Yeah. Maybe you could take a blended approach. Like you could still have the spontaneity of like pulling out of a jar, but you could color coordinate each like house projects, short trip or thing around town. And then you could know like if I pull pink, like that's going to be a thing around town, or am I feeling a house project? Let's pull green.
Or you get like 2 passes, right? If you don't like the first one, you get 2 more. I need to make it easier. Like, you get up to 2 passes if you really want them. Or you get like 10 passes throughout the year. I'm really good at over-engineering things. So
Me too.
We're going to come up with a really complex set of rules for how this works.
My corporate operations background is built for over-engineering, so I totally understand.
Same. Yeah.
Going back to freedom within a framework, I like that this is actually 2 sides of an equation too. There's both the framework, like how do you build some structure into your day? Maybe it's you do 3 simple things every day. It's like, what's got to be my workout? What's got to be my thing for fun? And what's got to be my thing for work or something? I like that. But the thing I'm also struggling with is embracing some of the freedom too. Like not just immediately filling my calendar with podcast stuff or business stuff or other people's things. I like the idea of Adventure Day because like just if I could align with Gabby, my wife, and just be like, hey, every Thursday for like the next 5 Thursdays has got to be Adventure Day. Don't schedule anything. I think that'd be really great. I think I can see myself kind of slipping out of like embracing some of the freedom and prioritizing some of the freedom to some degree. I don't know if you had any struggles with that or any advice on how you would deal with that.
The biggest thing that I have struggled with is putting other people's stuff before mine, which is kind of what you're saying, right? A little bit. And mine might be that I just want to read my book. It might be that I have ideas about the podcast that I've been wanting to explore and do, and I just haven't gotten around to it yet. I just notice that I am very quick to do other people's stuff first, things that I'm on a bunch of like community volunteer boards and things with my kids' school and the kids' volleyball teams. And like, it eats up a lot of time. And there's a lot of low hanging fruit that's so easy to like make things better that I'm like, oh, I love to get in there and be like, oh my gosh, what has been happening here? Like, let's clean this up and let's do this. And like, let's create a Google form for this. And it's very satisfying, right? And it gets me into the like old dopamine hits of me doing good things and getting praise and thank you from people. And I notice as a result, I do all that stuff before I do stuff for myself. The biggest learning I've had, and quite honestly, I worked with a coach earlier this year in Q1. Look at me, naming quarters. Q1 of 2026. So like kind of in the January to March or the February, March, April timeline. I learned this from him. Yeah, I actually did a podcast episode with the coach I hired about this, if people want to hear way more in depth on this. And it's episode 171 and on the Inside Out Money podcast. And what I learned was I was getting frustrated with myself, and I thought that everything I was just describing was a lack of discipline. I kept saying I need more discipline. I'm kind of frustrated that I'm not getting done the stuff I want to get done, whether it's health-related stuff. I mean, I would put working out behind other stuff. I finally had someone reframe it to me in a way that was incredibly powerful, that it was not a lack of discipline, it was a lack of self-respect. And I had like an aha moment. And he actually worded, like I sort of, vomited a lot of words to him in our first session. And he said to me something to the extent of, it sounds like you'll wake up and do things for other people, but not for yourself. And I was like, yes, exactly. Something about reframing that to me as a lack of self-respect for what I care about and what I want to do, and overly being an obliger, and a word came out funny, an obliger and a people pleaser. I just wasn't, I kept thinking like it's a lack of discipline, but I really have now reframed it as like, I want to respect myself enough to do the stuff that matters to me and that I care about most. I'm only a few months out from having this aha and realization. And again, I've known this at different times in my life, but I think it was the first time that I had this realization during early retirement, when I have a bit more freedom and autonomy to do something about it. And that's one thing I've noticed during early retirement is, when I was working, I was so busy. I did not have a lot of time to feel my feelings and to think about things on a more conceptual, like existential level. I just had to keep doing. I was on the hamster wheel, and we don't have time to question the hamster wheel. We just keep the wheel moving, And I have so much more time to think now. I do just spend a lot more time thinking about and exploring like how I'm living my life and where my time's going and what I'm doing. And it sometimes is a slow process because there's nobody driving it but me. But I am kind of slowly working through unwinding a lot of those things that I said I was kind of feeling early on with like the ennui and just moving from it was just such a big change from going 100 miles an hour to going like 10 miles an hour.
Yeah, I almost feel like on the people pleasing front, this is even more noticeable for me now. When I was running 100 miles an hour with the business and work and all the things, just adding one more on top of that was not a big deal. But like you, I love an open day when I look at my calendar and I'm like, great. And then I see like one 30-minute meeting on a commitment that I made like a month ago that I don't really even care about anymore. And I'm like, why did I do that? Like in the past, when that was one of 8 meetings that were just back to back to back to back, like it was no big deal. Yeah. But now I find myself trying to be a little bit more protective with my time, although ironically having more time to be able to give away too. I don't know how to describe that.
I feel you. I was really looking forward to having this discussion with you today, to be clear. But when I see anything on my calendar that is an actual scheduled time, I'm like, oh gosh, I got to really I got to think through, I got to make sure I do, it adds a whole nother level when I can just sort of do something at my leisure throughout the day where I'm like, oh, well, I'll just call Justin when I have time, when I feel like doing it today. But that's not how, there's obviously a lot of things like this where we need to schedule something. But I did just notice this thing where I really disliked scheduled things on my calendar, and I still kind of do. But at the same time, it adds structure. It just helps me to be more productive. And I use the term productive, to be clear, it means productive of what I want to do with my day. Because I will use the term productive a lot, and that at times I've been frustrated in early retirement with my level of productivity. And I'll have certain people be like, well, you don't need to be productive anymore. And I'm like, well, that's not true. I still have things I want to do with my life and that are important to me, from my own projects, my own passion projects, like the podcast, all sorts of things, like a book I want to read, something I want to do with my kids, like house project, all sorts of stuff, volunteer roles. I still want to be productive. I just want to be productive in a way that is in line with what matters to me.
Yes, 100% agree. Yeah, the freedom within a framework concept, I've even been trying to designate days where I can schedule things and have open days.
That's one of the things I've found most successful is where when you have that 30-minute thing in the middle of the day, it really, all of a sudden you couldn't just go do an adventure day that day. Yeah. But when you say, I don't have meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I never schedule anything on those days, and you can kind of put some rules in place. Again, you created the rules, so you're welcome to break it. If I'm trying to think of somebody really important calls you, right? If somebody really important calls you and is like, I want you to be on this. I was trying to think of what's a podcast where if they called you and were like,
if Brad from Choose FI was like, hey, I can only make Tuesday work, and Tuesday's like my meeting day, I'll probably be like, okay, I'll figure out how to work that around.
Yeah. You're like, I'm going to really have to move a lot of things around for you, Brad, but I'll do it for you. Again, that's the freedom within a framework. 80% of the time, you're going to stick to I don't take random meetings on random days.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's important. And it's something I'm trying to get even more structure to, or trying to hold true to. Like most things, it takes a couple of practices. Like the first time I pushed back on hey, I can't do that. Can you do next week? And they're like, yeah, sure. That works for me. And I'm like, whoa, I just moved them off. In years past, I would have just been probably rolled over and been like, yeah, I can make Thursday work. That's fine.
like for a split second, I sort of sweated emailing you about the World Cup.
Yeah.
Because I knew we had a little bit of back and forth. It was a little tricky to schedule it initially around both of our summer travel. And I was like, I could do it in the morning, whatever. And you had such a great response. But even if you didn't, who cares? You know what I mean? I should be fine with, it's not like I did it the morning of, I'm not disrespecting your time by asking you to reschedule once. And so I think we all need to give ourselves more permission that that's one thing I had to remind myself is I am in charge of my life now. I'm so fully in charge. And in my old corporate job, I managed it like I was in charge, right? I was on top of things, and I was very thoughtful and intentional and strategic about my time. And I went from that to just not even thinking and just kind of being very responsive. And all the things where if I had acted that way at my job, I never would have been successful. It's been an interesting learning. You know what another big fascinating learning I've had?
What's that?
That I have had to really like watch and kind of stop myself on is I have noticed that everything I do, not everything, but a lot of things I get into, I think about how I can monetize it. And I have ideas and I'm like, ooh, that would be a cool business, or that would be and then I'm like, what am I doing? I don't need to make money. And I'm not saying that in like a bragging way, but like I don't actually have a lot of extra time in my life right now between I'm trying to help my mom with a lot of stuff. I've got 3 kids that have a lot of needs. I have a ton of my own stuff. I've got friends and family, just all these things. And I'm not bored. As much as I've had a feeling of ennui, it's like listlessness. I've never been bored. I always have something I could be doing and arguably should be doing. But I just notice I frequently am like, have ideas to monetize something. And I'm like, well, stop it. I have to stop myself and be like, nope, not doing that, not doing that.
Ironically, this was like one of the very last threads that I crossed off of my interview notes for you, because I struggle with this too. I mean, I think as an entrepreneur, and I know you have a lot of entrepreneurial spirits as well, it is so easy for us to immediately go there. But A, we don't need the money. B, the money that we're going to make from it probably isn't going to be something that really moves the needle that much anyway. It's like, oh, we can monetize this podcast and it'd make us $5,000. And I'm like, at the end of the day, like $5,000 a year for probably hours of meetings with sponsors and paperwork and all these things, like just isn't worth it for me.
And it would get me back into like, I don't want to, I mean, first off, if you're trying to monetize something, don't create a podcast, because that's not going to make a ton of money. There's just so many better things to monetize.
As we're finishing up this conversation, Maggie, I'm curious, like you've been at this for 4 years now. I'd love for you to talk to your older self, maybe a year, or your younger self, a year out from early retirement. What would be some things that you would recommend to her that she start practicing now to get ready for early retirement?
I think I would remind myself that what got me here won't get me there. A lot of the traits that made me very successful in my corporate job and got me to financial independence, like hypervigilance, people pleasing, very focused on execution and delivery, and were actively destroying my ability to enjoy financial independence in many ways. I had to unlearn a lot of the very skills that made me get to FIRE in the first place. And so I would just remind myself that I'm actually going to have to change and rewire some of the arguably, I'd say, bad habits, right? That's a funny kind of term for it, because in many ways they made me wildly successful in some ways. But I just have to rewire myself and change, and that's normal, and that's an evolution, and that's okay. And then I think biggest other thing is just the respect piece. I used to use the word disciplined a lot, and I'm trying not to use that anymore. And I'm really reframing that as having self-respect and autonomy. I would remind that past self what it actually looks like to show myself respect and to start treating myself as my most important client, right? And to put in place the habits and the practices and the structure in my life that allow me to do that in a way that's, in line with what's important to me. And that's going to be different for everybody, right? But I just really would remind old Maggie or young Maggie, whatever, that self-respect is not being selfish. And I just heard this in a YouTube video this morning. People-pleasing is literally self-abandonment. I heard that term and I was like, yeah, I mean, that's the point of self-respect, right? But I put so much of my time into things for other people, and I abandoned myself along the way in many ways. And so I'm really trying to get back to focusing on what I think is important, which sometimes will be things for other people. I think those are the biggest things. And then also just enjoy the ride, enjoy the journey. God, there's some word I love more than autonomy. Oh, agency is one of my favorite. I couldn't even think of it, but it's one of my favorite words.
I wrote it down like 4 times. Every podcast interview, you mention the word agency, and I love it.
I love the word agency. We all, even when you're working in a job for someone else, right? You have agency over so many, not everything all the time, right? But you do have agency over a lot of things in your life. I like to look at the definition of something because it reminds me. So I just had to look it up. The literal definition, by the way, is going to take you to like a corporate agency or something. But what does it mean for a person to have agency? It means having the capacity to make independent choices, set goals, and take actions that shape your circumstances rather than just reacting to life. And I think in early retirement, that's probably a good thing to close on, right? We all have agency. Pre-retirement, we all have agency, but we really have a lot of it in early retirement. There is nothing stopping us from doing what we want to do, living our lives how we want to live it. And I think some people, myself included from times, I forget that I have agency over all of this, right? You forget at that random 30-minute meeting on your calendar, like even if you already scheduled it and it's not important to you, you don't want to be rude or like not follow through on something you committed to, but it might be something that you actually can just cancel and get out of. It's not too late to change your mind. And so we all have agency. And I have to remind myself sometimes that I have agency, even over my teenage daughters who don't treat me like I have a lot of agency some days. I am in charge and I have a lot of agency and they have agency and I'm trying to teach them that. But I think it's a great word and a very important thing to remind all of ourselves.
That's a great place to end it, Maggie. You have an awesome podcast, Inside Out Money. Would love it if you shared a little bit about the podcast and what people can expect if they listen to an episode.
Yeah, it's, as you said, called Inside Out Money. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts. And yeah, I have a rotating set of co-hosts. They're all friends of mine, though, from different aspects of life. And they all bring very different angles and perspectives. You know, we just added Ginger from Choose Fi is one of the new rotating co-hosts, actually. Our sort of like thing it's all about redefining wealth from the inside out. But I also like to describe it as like, it's not a dry financial podcast. I don't think yours is either, by the way. But there are some that like are just really like getting into numbers and like that's hard to do on an audio podcast also. But it really is like friends talking about money. We spend a lot of time talking about mindset. We try to keep it fun. We try to keep it entertaining and super casual. And it's the sort of thing where if you are on the path to FI, or maybe you're already at FI, wherever you're at in your journey, I think listening to any financial podcast, but particularly something like Inside Out Money or I've listened to a lot of yours, Justin. I'd put yours in the same category with Minded, of listening to a podcast like that on a regular basis. It just puts the sort of voices you want in your ear that help motivate you and keep you on your journey and give you some sense of kind of community and also just putting the right messages at you at a time when you need to hear them and just keeping up the momentum and giving you, I think, voices that are helpful along the journey.
I feel like we're such a good companion partnership in terms of podcast. We talk a little bit here and there on some of the strategy behind it, but at the end of the day, like we're a little past the personal finance early strategies you need to implement. Most of the other people are struggling with some of the things like we talked about today. So Maggie, this was a blast. Once again, this is Maggie Tucker from Inside Out Money. Maggie, you're welcome back anytime. It was a blast talking to you today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on and have a great day.